A Volusia County teen will now spend the next 45 years in prison for strangling his own mom to death.
Gregory Ramos was 15 years old when he confessed to killing her and burying her body.
It's truly hard to think of any action more heartless than taking a life without cause. This is the unsettling story of 15-year-old Gregory Ramos, who committed a brutal crime against his mom, 46-year-old Gail, and then shared a deeply disturbing confession, unlike anything you'd expect from a teenager.
911, where's your emergency?
I just got home and my house is completely trashed. It looks like someone broke in the side door.
At around 3:52 p.m. on the 2nd of November, 2018, 911 received a call from 35 Alisante Road in Volusia County, Florida. On the call was 15-year-old Gregory Ramos, who informed the dispatcher of a possible burglary into his mother, Gail Cleavinger's home, and that his mother was missing despite her car being left running in the driveway. Volusia County Police quickly rushed to the scene of the crime, where they found the entire house ransacked and thrashed. Several electronics were notably missing, so it did look like there was a burglary. Gregory's stepfather was reportedly away on a business trip, and Greg informed detectives that he wasn't sure if his mom had gone to work and that he had last seen her around 6:30 that morning as he left for school.
Did you leave for work before you? She dropped me off, and then she usually just heads back to the Sunrail and hops in the train with her bike. And
the house looked more trashed than a burglary scene and more like something done with a personal vendetta. So when investigators found out that Gail had in fact not showed up to work, the detectives began having their suspicions. But with nothing else to work with, the detectives invited Gregory in for some more questioning. During the interrogations, Greg initially seemed adamant that he had nothing to do with his trashed-up house or the disappearance of his mother. However, after he became aware that his two closest friends, Dylan and Brian, had been reached out to, that's when Greg's tune changed. Before we plunge into the riveting interrogations, let's rewind to the very inception, where the seeds of Greg's actions started. Gregory Logan Ramos was born on the 14th of June, 2003 to Gail Cleavinger, an architect, and a currently unknown father. Gail, however, remarried at some point to his stepfather, Daniel Cleavinger, who reportedly had two sons that lived with their mother. Growing up, Greg seemed to share a lovely bond with his mother, Gail. The pair even went for martial arts classes together, and Greg was also a member of the Boy Scouts. But it seems the bond between them began to break once he got into high school. Greg used to volunteer as a police explorer with the Orange City Police Department, and also studied criminal justice and crime investigation at the University High School, which he attended. It was also reported that he wanted to become a homicide detective, and it's possible studying all of those crimes made him want to experience what it would be like to be at the center of a criminal investigation. Probably due to the fact that he had grown up as an only child, Greg wasn't always the most social person, but he did have a couple of friends which would be important to this story. Their names were Brian Porras and Dylan Kuglerek, and they were both 17 at the time. In high school, Greg managed to do pretty well in most subjects, but he notably struggled in biology class, and this seemed to have worried his parents, especially his mom, who constantly asked him to improve his grades. Greg's stepfather was also aware of his low grades, but since he was usually out of town, he left Gail alone to do all the disciplining. This is probably how the relationship between Gail and Greg began to fracture. Around that time, Greg had begun to smoke cigarettes and drink, as well as the occasional use of recreational substances. However, what unfolded on the ominous 2nd of November was a divergence far beyond the realm of these influences. The day before Gail's life was taken, Greg received the grades he got on a biology test. Apparently, he had gotten a D, and when he had shown his mother the grade on the eve of the crime, she got upset and the pair got into a serious altercation. During the argument, it seems Greg did something to upset his mother, which led her to reportedly disciplining him multiple times, leaving him with a few scars. This angered Greg, who then reportedly went into his room around 11 p.m., enraged and thinking about how to retaliate. A few moments later, around 12:30 a.m., Greg reportedly went into his mother's room to address her. In the ensuing struggle, he restrained her against the wall and prevented her from moving before continuing to hold her on the floor until he thought she was dead. However, after stepping out to survey the vicinity and look for ways to dispose of her body, Greg came back to find his mother still moving and finish the job. Afterwards, he found a way to dispose of her body at a local church. The next morning, Greg was picked up by his pals and he went to school like nothing happened. Then he was reported to not be in the school premises after 1:10 p.m. And a few hours later, he called the police to inform them of what he wanted to look like a robbery and the disappearance of his mother. At first, the potential suspects were vast because it truly could have been anyone. As the hours of interrogation unfolded, it became evident that Greg was far from an ordinary teenager, and startling confessions of his friends indicated he wasn't acting alone. Dive into the riveting interrogations to uncover the shocking truth. After the cops got what seemed to be concrete information from Greg that his stepfather and step-siblings were away, it became obvious that Greg was a potential witness or even suspect in Gail's disappearance. On arriving at the station, Greg was paired with his sponsor from his Police Explorer program, Detective Jones, who was the first to question him and asked him about his scars, to which Greg lied about getting them from a kid named Joe.
I talked it out with him, and we made up, and he apologized for hitting me, and I accepted it. What was his name? We hugged it out. My friend, Joe.
Gregory and Jones were joined by the main interrogator, Sergeant Pagliari, who introduced himself before asking Greg about his relationship with his mom. Greg said it was good and informed him about a previous non-abusive altercation they had after he was suspended for unknowingly carrying a pack of cigarettes to school.
And how'd your mom feel about that? She was not happy. But we worked out a solution, which was me going to do community service for my church.
Pagliari then tried to draw up a timeline leading up to Gail's disappearance by getting info out of Greg concerning what had happened the day before. Greg appeared to be anxious during the investigation, and it looked like he was selectively answering Pagliari's questions, as if he was strictly following an alibi which he had set for himself. The sergeant then questioned Greg about what he witnessed as he got home, and despite seeming pretty anxious earlier, Gregory began to give Pagliari an almost perfect description of what he had found and what was missing, even adding physical demonstrations to it.
Because either that or they somehow forced the door open, but it had to be a strong enough force to break this, like a person break a lock.
However, Greg's stories were filled with so many contradictions that the police department eventually reached out to his school to confirm his statements, where they found that his confessions weren't adding up, but Greg denied the reports from the school.
Should I believe everything that you told me today, Greg? I mean, it's up to you. Well, here's the thing, okay? Do you think that I'm not going to go or have some of my detectives go and run down your story and verify all these places you read? Yeah.
Obviously, the interrogators didn't believe Greg and asked for the actual truth. Sergeant Pagliari then tried to make a suggestion that Greg's mom had been mistreating him and was responsible for the scars. However, Greg brushed it off, but agreed to make a confession on what actually happened.
So, do you want to know what happened today? Yes.
In his confession, he revealed that he had snuck out following the altercation with his mom with best pals Dylan and Brian. The three boys allegedly drove around town in Gail's SUV and even made a stop at the local church to get wasted before eventually settling back in their homes around 5:30 a.m. The entire confession looked like Greg was trying to evade the main question regarding his mother's disappearance and was merely trying to establish an alibi. But unbeknownst to him, his other two pals, Dylan and Brian, were also being interrogated separately. Dylan was the first to be interrogated, but he initially lied about his relationship with Greg.
Have you talked to Greg today?
I saw him at school.
How good of friends are you guys?
I mean, I talked to him, but we're not like super close.
Kind of weird, given that Greg had allegedly once talked him out of taking his life. He also denied knowledge about Gail's disappearance and gave account of the last time he saw Greg, confirming that he and Brian had in fact driven with Greg that morning. But he claimed not to have seen Greg after lunch.
The time you saw Greg that day was in the morning and in the afternoon at lunch, and you haven't seen him since?
I didn't really see him, no.
Brian corroborated most of Dylan's confessions, but slipped up when he eventually revealed that he had driven Greg and Dylan to Greg's home after fifth period.
I left after fifth period.
Who'd you take with you?
With me, it was me and Dylan. And Greg, but I took him home.
Where did you go?
I took him back.
To his house.
Now, it was evident that all three men had been at Greg's home on the day of the crime. Pressed for answers, Dylan, who was having a breakdown, made more confessions to the interrogators, including revealing that some of the items Greg reported as missing were in fact handed over to him by Greg.
He gave me his gaming laptop, his gaming PC. He gave me his bow that I borrowed.
Today?
Hold that.
He gave you his personal computer too? And the bow?
and the bow.
But the most shocking revelation of all was still to come. Dylan revealed to the interrogators that he and Brian received a call from Greg that morning, where he openly confessed to the disappearance of his mother before they went to school.
Me and Brian were driving to school this morning, and he called me and Brian, said, hey, something big happened. He wouldn't say it on the phone, so me and him had to go get him. Then he gets in the car, and he says, I did it. I really did it. I killed my mother.
Later that day, Greg then asked them to take what they wanted from his house, basically having them help him stage the burglary. Brian eventually corroborated this story, and the detectives reached out to Sergeant Pagliari to inform him of their chilling discovery. With the truth now out, Pagliari sought to get a conclusive confession from Greg, and this was where it truly got chilling. Despite the revelation of contact with his friends, Greg initially continued to deny his role in the disappearance of his mom. However, after a brief moment of silence, he probably realized that there was nothing else he could do.
Whatever. Alright, I'll tell you what happened.
And what happened next was the most shocking confession. Greg shared with Pagliari that she had hit him several times. In response, he entered her room, expressing his frustration by restraining her, leaving her seemingly unconscious. He then went to get a wheelbarrow to help him move her body before discovering on his return that his mother was still alive. It took almost 30 minutes, but this time, Greg finished off the job, put 2 belts around her ankle, then placed her body in the wheelbarrow before dragging her into the trunk of her car. According to Greg, he then drove around thinking about what to do with his mom's body before deciding to drive to the Riverview Church, where he tried to dig a hole under a fire pit. Apparently, it was too dark, so he drove back home to get some candles and a flashlight so he could see properly. When he got back to the church, Greg dug up a large hole and threw some items from his home first. He attempted to retrieve his mom's wedding ring, but lacking a suitable tool, he disposed of her body in a hole. To conceal any evidence, he poured bleach, refilled the hole, and restored the fire pit, concealing additional items like laptops and a gun in the nearby woods. He also hid some more objects such as 2 laptops and a .30 caliber gun behind the woods surrounding the fire pit. During the confessions, Greg showed an utter lack of remorse towards his gruesome actions, and even showed some disdain for his mom, calling her a bitch. He also revealed that he contemplated running away and even taking his life by driving his mom's SUV into oncoming traffic. This time, he sounded much freer, indicating that he was now showing his normal demeanor. As the confessions went on, Greg also explained why he trashed the house, and even asked the detective if he thought it was convincing enough.
So, I decided to make it look like a box robbery, so I just went to my house and I just threw shit everywhere, which looked pretty convincing.
Interestingly, he tried to make himself look like the victim, and indicated that he was just acting on self-defense because his mom could have killed him. It was a shocking recollection of events by Greg that sounded like something from a horror story. But his confessions revealed that he in fact didn't act alone. Apparently, Dylan and Brian had been well informed, and since he knew they had snitched, Greg made sure to fully implicate them. Finally, Greg agreed to follow the cops to where he buried his mom to reenact his actions of that night. Once they got there, Greg explained everything and also revealed that he had used his knowledge of crime scene analysis from school to disguise the scene. And when they dug up the hole, they found Gail Cleavenger's decomposing body, a terribly gory sight. A few meters away, Dylan and Brian were being detained in a patrol vehicle, still unaware of the consequences of their actions. A recorded conversation showed the pair discussing the repercussions of their actions. Brian was more worried about his father and family disowning him, and Dylan was worried about losing his job. Neither of them were worried about the fact that they had just helped cover up the crime. Eventually, all 3 boys were reunited in the same patrol car, seemingly still unaware of the gravity of their actions and more worried about trivial matters. They were then taken to the Department of Juvenile Justice to be detained. Yet, as all 3 men involved were minors, the looming question remained: will they be charged as adults or minors? Brace yourself for the upcoming trial, where the fate of these young individuals will be decided in a courtroom battle of twists and turns. Following their detention, Brian was offered a bond for $100,000, which his family quickly paid off. He then went on to graduate high school, started college, and even got a job as he awaited trials. Dylan, on the other hand, had his bond deal delayed due to his mental health concerns. And when his bond was finally revealed after 10 months, it was for $200,000, a fee he was unable to pay off, so he was held in detention in a special area for juveniles where he had to be placed on a mental health watch. It took almost 2 years for the trials to commence, with people arguing whether or not the 3 boys should be tried as adults. When they finally appeared in court on the 22nd of January 2021, Brian apologized for his role in the crime and recounted how Gail always cared for his safety, as well as testifying that he didn't believe Greg when he first told him what he did to his mom. Brian and Dylan, now 22, were both charged as adults with accessory after the fact to second-degree murder, to which they both pleaded no contest. Brian was sentenced to 828 days in jail, followed by a 10-year probation, while Dylan was sentenced to a 14-year probation with the first 364 days spent in the Volusia County Jail. Today, both men are out of jail but remain under probation. The judge also withheld adjudication, meaning that they wouldn't have a felony conviction on their record for Gail's murder. They were also required to abstain from alcohol and illegal substances. However, Dylan spent some time in jail in October 2022 after violating his probation by fleeing from police during a traffic stop and crashing into another vehicle. Greg, now 20, was charged as an adult with first-degree premeditated murder, abuse of a dead human body, and tampering with physical evidence, and pleaded guilty to the charges.
Pleading guilty to first-degree murder, abuse of a dead human body, tampering with physical evidence. Do you understand that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Did you do it?
Yes, Your Honor.
He could have faced the death penalty of life in prison, but as he was a minor, he was sentenced to a total of 45 years in prison, reviewable after 25 years, as well as a lifetime of probation. He is currently incarcerated in the Sewanee Correctional Institution in Florida and will remain there at least until 2063. In our next video, embark on a yoga instructor's journey that transforms from peaceful stretches to a gripping international manhunt.